Hello everyone, I'm Sahibi Miransha and I'm a program manager on the Windows Experiences and Devices team and I work specifically on MSIX. Today, my colleague Tanaka Jimha and I are going to talk about setting up an end-to-end workflow for your Windows app development, focusing on the powerful combination of MSIX and CI/CD pipelines. If you're not already familiar with MSIX, let me summarize it for you. MSIX is our modern Windows app packaging format, which has evolved from the best of our previous formats like MSI, Windows Click Once, and AppX. MSIX is our recommended app packaging format because it delivers some key benefits. For example, you can reuse your existing assets and make use of this modern packaging experience for all your Windows apps, whether they are Win32, UWP, WPF, or Windows Forms apps. All MSIX packages are required to be signed using a trusted certificate from the publisher, and that provides integrity to the app. MSIX also provides reliable installs, boasting a 99.9% success rate over billions of installs with a guaranteed and clean uninstall that prevents PC rot. Apps are installed per user and Windows manages installs, updates, and removes. MSIX also offers declarative install, and that means less need to customize or script your installer, which makes the packaging and deployment experience so much simpler. And last but not the least, your app can always stay up to date by using the MSIX auto update feature, which we'll dive into some more detail later. So now that we understand MSIX a little better, let's see why you would want to use CI/CD pipelines. We know that you want to be able to deploy your app more frequently, get your binaries to your customers faster and error-free, and that you want to be able to save time and save money. The great thing is we found that high performance DevOps companies achieve these goals by taking advantage of optimized DevOps workflows. So that is what we want to help you achieve and why we are talking about DevOps or CI/CD pipelines because it allows you to achieve these goals by automating your builds, testing, integration, and deployments as you make and push your code changes. So now that we understand the benefits of MSIX and the benefits of DevOps, let's discuss how they fit into your app development workflow. Your workflow can basically be split into three parts: development, build and packaging, and deployment. Now, when we think about incorporating DevOps in the mix, there's basically no change to the first part. You would develop your app, author your code as you normally would, using the technologies that you usually do. But you can automate your build and packaging process, and you can automate your deployments by using CI/CD pipelines. MSIX also makes your build and packaging process easier based on the benefits we discussed earlier. And it makes your deployment part even better with efficient and auto updates. And it helps you get your app to your customers even faster, whether you choose to distribute it via the Microsoft Store or through your own website using an app installer, or by using enterprise management solutions like the Configuration Manager or Intune. The way to currently achieve this DevOps setup is by configuring your Azure pipelines with a handcrafted YAML file. And that can be complicated, error-prone, time-consuming, and intimidating for people who are not familiar with the technology. And we have been listening to your feedback about this, and that is why we now have an Azure DevOps extension, which will offer you an intuitive UI-based workflow, which will set up your pipeline for you based on the information you provide. So the MSIX CI/CD extension that I just mentioned will handle all the components of build and packaging workflow, and based on the options you select and inputs you provide, it will set up your pipeline to plug in your source code, build it, package it as an MSIX, handle signing using the trusted certificate you provide, and configure deployment and auto update settings for you. The extension will very soon be available on the Visual Studio Marketplace, and we would love to see your adoption and hear your feedback about it. So to get your end-to-end workflow set up, you mainly just need your source code, some form of source control, and a CI/CD pipeline. Now, you don't have to be using Visual Studio necessarily. You can use any IDE or any tools that you use. But the reason I mention it here is because we will be using Visual Studio for the demo. I also want to mention here that the MSIX packaging utility is integrated within Visual Studio and offers a seamless UI-based flow to package your app as an MSIX and maybe do some local testing. You can use any tool for source control or version control that plugs into Azure pipelines because you would need that to be able to use the MSIX packaging extension. And to set up your CI/CD pipeline, you do need Azure pipelines, as the MSIX extension will be available on the Visual Studio Marketplace, which you can grab and install in your Azure DevOps organization. So Tanaka has a really cool demo set up for us to see what the end-to-end workflow looks like. So let's go check that out.
Hello, my name is Tanaka Jima. I'm a program manager on the Windows Developers and Experiences team, and I work on MSIX and our application deployment. So what I want to do today is kind of show you how you can use the combination of MSIX as a deployment technology and then CI/CD pipelines in Azure DevOps to create a streamlined workflow to get application updates and deployments to your users. So what I will show you is an application that I've made that I'm working on, and then how I can make changes to that in Visual Studio and how those changes will end up on a user's machine. And I'll tell you everything else kind of in between that sticks it all together. And that is a powerful combination of MSIX and CI/CD pipelines in Azure DevOps. So let's jump in and see how that works. Okay. So what I have here is a website that I'm using to distribute my application. In this case, I'm using a website, but if you're using Microsoft Intune or Configuration Manager, you can continue using those solutions. In this case, I'm just using this website for the purpose of the demo. So what my site allows users to do is download my application from here. And if I click on the download button, what you'll see is we get this nice UI driven by the app installer file in Windows, and it says that this app is already installed. I already have this package installed, and as you can see here, it's version 1.1.40. So instead of reinstalling this, I'm going to launch the application that I already have installed. So this is my app, and it's a simple app that you can add photos to and play around with the photos. So what I want to do now is essentially add new functionality or add a new feature to my application, and then show you how from adding that, making those changes in Visual Studio, those same features will end up on my end users' machines in a very seamless manner. And the glue in the middle, or the missing pieces rather in the middle, are using CI/CD pipelines in Azure DevOps, and that will streamline the entire process from Visual Studio to getting those new binaries or those new features on my end user's device. So you can use this mechanism to deploy new features or to send out bug fixes. And it's a great way to keep new versions of your application flowing to your users. So let's look at the different pieces that I have that I'm going to work with here. So I have my code in Visual Studio. And if you see here, this is the familiar UI of the application. So this is where I'm going to make changes to my application. And then the next piece is my repository in GitHub. So this is where I have my code, and this is where I'll be pushing out my changes to. And then pulling from here is a build pipeline in Azure DevOps. So what it essentially does is anytime there's a new commit or a new code in my repository on GitHub, it creates a new build of my package, of my application, and then packages that that new build as an MSIX, and it also creates metadata that I'll use for updating the application. I'll kind of walk you through some of the details a little later. Another part here is a release pipeline that I have. So what this release pipeline does is it takes any newly built binaries from my build pipeline, and then it deploys them to my website. So it will essentially pull in any new versions of my application available, and then deploy them on my server such that they will be available to users. However, as we'll see, users don't have to come back to the site and try to install a new version from here. One of the great things about MSIX is that we have auto-update functionality that you can take advantage of, such that Windows will actually drive the update of your application if a new version is available. And I'll show you how that is set up in a little bit. So this is the overview of the different pieces I have here. Again, I have my application, right, being distributed to this site. I have my code in Visual Studio, and I have my build pipeline, and then my release pipeline, and then I have the site I'm using to deploy my application. So let's go back to the app itself. Now, if you look at the app, one of the ways you can currently add a new photo is using this button here. So if I click on that, I can select a new picture. And let's add that. And voila, the new picture has been added to the application, right? So this is great. Now what I want to do is kind of take this a step further and say, if a user is browsing through images like this, then if they right click on the image and try to share, so this is the share functionality in Windows, and they try to share out that image, I want my application photo store to be one of the options that they see over here, right? So this would be a cool feature where my app would show up, and then they'd be able to select my app, and then the image they select will be sent out to my application, right? So this is the new feature that I want to add to my application. As you can see right now, my app photo store isn't one of the options. So let's go and make that happen. I'm going to go over to Visual Studio. And so this is my code, right? This is my application, and I'm using the app packaging project. And this is a project in Visual Studio that allows you to take a desktop application and package it as MSIX. So if you are currently using a desktop application or developing a desktop application, you can use a packaging project to create an MSIX package for your application. So let's go and make the code change. I already have this code here, and I'm just going to uncomment it. Okay, there we go. So what this does is it's essentially saying that register my application photo store as a share target, such that if somebody's trying to share any one of these image file types, let my application be an option for them to share out that image to. All right, so this is the new share functionality I want my application to have. I'm just gonna make one more change here. So as a visual aid, I'm going to modify the title of my app. So let's call that photo store share, so that when we see this new version, we'll know that it's the updated version with the share functionality. Right. So I've made my changes. Now the next step is, as I would then push these changes out to our repository, right, on GitHub. So I'm going to do that from here. And add my commit message here. and then I'm going to push out those changes to my GitHub repository. So I'll give that a few minutes, or a few seconds rather. So we got our success message for the changes getting up to GitHub. So let's go and have a look at our repository. So here's my GitHub repo. Let me refresh this. And if you can see here, there's a new change that was added about 41 seconds ago. So that's the one, the commit that I just made, right? Add share target. So our changes have been registered here on GitHub. Now let's go have a look at our pipeline. So let me refresh the page here. And so what has happened is a new build pipeline has actually kicked off. If you can see, about 30 seconds ago now, a new build was started. And that was triggered from the changes that I made in my GitHub repository. So you see, I didn't really have to do anything. I had it pre-configured such that when the new changes hit my repo, a new build would start using that the new version of the code that was available on GitHub. So this new build that's running right now has the new share functionality that I just added, and this was all automated, right? So I want to show you what exactly is going on kind of behind the scenes in a little bit more detail. We realize that sometimes creating a CI/CD pipelines may not always be that simple. So what we did is, to make things easier for you, is we added these Azure DevOps tasks. So you can use these to package your application as MSIX. And we have a task for you to use to build your application and packages in MSIX. And we have another task that you can use to create an app installer file. And an app installer file is what we use to drive the specific update settings for my application, such that when a new version of my application is available, Windows will kind of automatically pull down that version, as we'll see later. And then we also have a task for you to sign your package. So an MSIX package must be signed with a cert that is trusted on a machine for it to be installed on a machine. And we use that to vouch for the integrity of the package and guard against malicious content. So you can sign using this task in Azure DevOps. And I have a bonus one here that I'm not actually using today, but you can also create a VHDX for MSIX app attach. So if you're using MSIX app attach in WVD, for example, you can create a VHDX package here in Azure DevOps to use for those deployments, right? So what my build is doing is it's essentially building the new version of my package, creating an app installer file with the update settings for my application, and then signing my package, right? Now, once my code is built, I'll end up with that MSIX package, and I'll end up with that app installer file, right? Now let's have a look at the release pipeline. So what my release pipeline does, here's an example of a pipeline that was run previously. So what my pipeline does is it takes that new build, right, of my application, and then it deploys it to my web server such that it's now available on my site. And so this means that anytime a new version of my application is built, it'll automatically get then deployed to my server. So if you're using a separate mechanism to distribute your app, you can configure that in your release pipeline. So as you can see here, the build to actually add the share functionality for my application has completed. And I'm going to refresh my release pipeline page, and you'll see that release was actually kicked off of the new version of my package. And this is the one that has the share functionality in it. So that means that the new version of my package should be available on my server. So what I want to do now is I'm going to close the application, the photo store app. And then I'm going to launch it again. So you'll notice this UI prompt here. What's happening now is because I have that app installer file driving the installation, the update of my application, Windows kind of checks to see if there's a new version of my application present. And you can configure your own file to show the prompt or to not show the prompt. And in my case, I'm showing the prompt more as a visual aid so that you all see kind of what's happening in the background. So here it is picked up on the new version of PhotoStore, right? This is version 1.1.41. And if you remember, that's the same version that was recently deployed, right? So I'm going to actually update the application. I'm going to take this new version, and I'll give that a second to pull down the new bits. So what this has done is it's downloaded the new version of PhotoStore. And if you remember that visual aid that we added in the code earlier, you see this share title here that I added to share. This is the new version of my package that has the share functionality in it. So let's go and actually try it out. I'm going to go back to my images, and I'm going to try to share out an image to my app. So if I say share here, you'll see that my application PhotoStore is actually one of the options that shows up now to share an image file to. So I'm going to say yes to that. And as you can see here, it has added the new image to my application. So this is the new image that I just shared out right now. And my application was successfully registered as a share target. So the code changes that I made a few minutes ago are now available on my machine in this new version of my application. Right. So one of the things that I mentioned here was that we are using an app installer file, and I want to kind of show you what that looks like in a little bit more detail. So I have this file defined in my application that I'm deploying with my application, and you can see here there's an element that says update settings. So what this does is it tells Windows that anytime the application is launched, check for an update. And that's why you saw that when I launched the application, there was an update check. You can also specify whether or not you want to show a prompt. And in my case, I'm showing a prompt, but you can also set this to false and the user won't see a prompt when the update check is happening. In addition to that, there's this element which is called update blocks activation. And this essentially says that if you want a user to have to take an update before they can launch the app, right, then they must take the update. So this is very useful in cases where, let's say you have a very bad bug that you want fixed and you don't want users to use the application before they take the new update of the application. So if you set this to true, it means that a user will have to update to the new version if the new version is available before they can actually launch the application. So it's a good switch to use in those types of scenarios. And there's also this automatic background task that element you see here. And what this does is it essentially says that even if the application hasn't been launched, still check for updates in the background. So you'll see here, like this is all happening when the application launches, right? But even if the app hasn't been launched, you can configure it such that Windows will still check for an update for your app. So even if your app hasn't been used in a specific period of time, Windows will check for an update, and this happens every 8 hours. And so this background task will run and make sure to check to see if there are any new versions of the application. If they are, they will be automatically pulled down. So these are some of the switches that you can use in the app installer file to drive the installation and the updating of your package. All right. So let's kind of recap that one more time to see what we did and how we ended up here. So I had my application, right? And then I had my code and Visual Studio, and this is where I make changes to my app. And in addition to all of this, I had my repository on GitHub, push changes out to my repo, and then I had my build pipeline that kicked off when the change happened. right? So create a new build of my application, a new version of my application. And it packaged the app as an MSIX and created an app installer file for the updates. And then that was deployed to my site using a REST pipeline that I had set up. So it took those artifacts, deployed them to my site, and then they were available for my users. And because I'm using auto updates with MSIX, I didn't actually have to come in and download the new version here. But when I launched the application, the new version was downloaded, and I had that new version with a share functionality on my machine. So you see that this is a fantastic way for you to actually make sure that you get new features out to your users as quickly as possible and as streamlined, as smooth as possible. So yeah, this is a great setup, and it's very handy in kind of today's world. So it's definitely something to kind of take a look at and take advantage of.
That was a really cool demo. And as we wrap that up, I want to leave you with some additional resources. The first link points to our MSIX DevOps sample GitHub repository, where you can learn best practices when doing DevOps for your Windows application. The second link points to our official MSIX documentation. The MSIX tech community is a place where you can ask questions, discuss topics on various aspects of MSIX, and stay updated on new announcements and new features. The last link is to the MSIX labs, which provide a series of hands-on exercises to help people get familiar with different aspects of MSIX, like the MSIX packaging tool and MSIX core. I hope you had fun learning more about MSIX and DevOps with us today. Thank you.